Ever since the war in Iran kicked off, it's been abundantly clear that US President Donald Trump's best-case scenario has always been to replicate his purported success in Venezuela. On March the 1st, for instance, barely a couple of days after the first strikes, Trump told the New York Times, quote, "What we did in Venezuela, I think, is the perfect scenario." After Iranian state media confirmed that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had been killed in the opening strikes, Trump told Axios, quote, "I have to be involved in the next appointment, like with Del C in Venezuela." As recently as last Thursday, barely a couple of days before the peace deal was announced, Trump was posting on Truth Social that we will be taking Karg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela. Obviously, Trump ultimately backtracked on these threats and effectively capitulated in Iran. But on top of that, while Trump's Venezuela operation was initially hailed as a success by both the administration and many Venezuelans, its sheen has since worn off, and polls suggest public opinion has started to turn. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at what's happening in Venezuela and why Venezuelans are apparently souring on Trump. Contrary to Trump's original talk of regime change, the war in Iran has apparently cemented the Iranian regime's grip on power. In the latest issue of our magazine, we explain how this happened and why it's too early to be pessimistic about the future of Iran. That's just one of 80 pages in the magazine, because there's more in Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So let's start by explaining why the US intervention in Venezuela was originally seen as a success, at least by the Trump administration. The operation itself went pretty smoothly. Maduro was extracted without any US casualties, and Trump spent much of the subsequent weeks waxing lyrical about America's military prowess, much as he did after the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
The operation was probably illegal under international law, which is why the international reaction was somewhat mixed. But it was undeniably popular with ordinary Venezuelans, who aren't generally too keen on Maduro. A poll conducted via mobile in mid-January, for instance, found that more than 50% of respondents agreed with the operation against Maduro, while just 13% opposed it. Similarly, the vast majority of respondents said they expected both the political situation and their own economic situation to get better, and a sizable plurality said they supported US governance in the country, although opinions were more mixed when it came to Venezuela's oil industry. This would be consistent with another poll carried out by Atlas Intel at about the same time, which found that a majority of Venezuelans, and South Americans generally, thought that Venezuela would be better off without Maduro. This should be unsurprising when you consider Maduro's appalling record. Since he took power in 2013, Venezuela has suffered through a period of acute democratic backsliding, with Maduro effectively establishing himself as a dictator, and the Venezuelan economy has cratered. The World Bank estimates that Venezuela's GDP fell from $372 billion in 2012, before Maduro took over, to a low of $42 billion in 2020 when the pandemic hit. If these numbers are accurate, they would imply a nearly 90% decline in national GDP, one of the worst economic contractions ever recorded. Maduro's government reacted by desperately printing money, pushing Venezuela into one of the worst hyperinflation episodes in modern history, with year-on-year inflation peaking at about 350,000% in 2019. Somewhat unsurprisingly, this dysfunction gave way to a humanitarian crisis, with chronic shortages of essential goods, and sparked a massive wave of emigration, with an estimated 7.9 million Venezuelans fleeing the country since 2014. You get the point. Maduro has been generally terrible for Venezuela, which is why the operation against him was actually pretty well received by ordinary Venezuelans. It also made Trump remarkably popular in the country. A poll by Mega Analysis from mid-January, for instance, found that 92% of Venezuelans were grateful to Trump, while another poll by the same agency from March put his approval rating in Venezuela at 75%, nearly double his approval rating in the US. Trump apparently noticed, and even joked a couple of months ago that he was so popular in Venezuela he might run for their president next.
I'm polling higher than anybody has ever polled in Venezuela. So after I'm finished with this, I can go to Venezuela. I will quickly learn Spanish. It won't take too long. I'm good at language. And I will go to Venezuela. I'm going to run for president.
At the time, it looked like things were headed in the right direction. Maduro was swiftly replaced by Delcy Rodriguez, colloquially known as just Delcy. Delcy was nominally Maduro's vice president, but it has since become clear that she was cooperating with the US ahead of the operation, and she's basically done everything the Trump administration has asked of her since. This has included releasing hundreds of political prisoners in her first weeks in charge, and allowing supporters of opposition leader Maria Corina Machado to organise pro-democracy rallies in Caracas and elsewhere. Delcy has also purged her administration of Maduro loyalists, to the point that only about half of her current cabinet are holdovers, and detained oligarchs and business people who were previously close to Maduro. However, in recent months, progress has apparently stalled. Delcy has filled any newly vacant positions in her cabinet not with democratically minded reformers, but with her own set of loyalists. She stopped releasing political prisoners, and her administration seems uninterested in returning Venezuela to democracy, presumably because they know that, if an election were to happen, Delcy wouldn't do well and would be thrashed by Machado. Nor has she pursued any meaningful economic reform. Instead, Delcy has essentially replaced Maduro's cronies in the business community with her own, including most notably her partner Yusuf Abu Nassif Smaili and his family. Unsurprisingly, the Venezuelan economy hasn't recovered. Growth is still stagnant. Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, has continued to decline, and inflation is running at an annual rate of over 500%. This is despite the fact that, thanks largely to a relaxation in US sanctions, Venezuelan oil exports, which have historically accounted for the vast majority of all foreign currency earnings and government revenue, have surged in recent months. Production has risen from about 900,000 barrels a day in 2025 to more like 1.3 million today. Once you take into account the recent rise in global oil prices, this means that, this year, total oil revenues could be up by something like 70%. And yet, this growth in foreign currency earnings doesn't seem to be going to ordinary Venezuelans, or even the Venezuelan government. In fact, under the agreement between Delcy and the Trump administration, the vast majority of the money goes straight to the US Treasury, which is then primarily responsible for distributing it. Somewhat suspiciously, this doesn't seem to be happening. The US Treasury has only admitted to a single $500 million payment back to Venezuela, which would represent a tiny fraction of the billions of dollars in oil revenues that the country has earned since Maduro's ousting. In this light, it should be unsurprising that Venezuelan public opinion has started to turn. The latest mega-analysis poll, published in May, put Trump's approval rating at 47%, down nearly 30 points, and it's almost definitely fallen further since. The risk here is that, unless the Trump administration pays more attention to Venezuela, the odds of meaningful reform, either political or economic, will tend back towards zero. The latest issue of our magazine is out now, and if you want our best value ever, subscribing and using code SUMMER26 gets you your first copy for as cheap as £4.99, as well as 20% off as long as you stay subscribed. I told you about one of the articles at the start of this video, but this issue's truly jam-packed with content from all around the world. Obviously, the headline section is our rundown of Trump's wars around the world, discussing all of the different countries and regions which have faced Trump's military wrath, going nation by nation through the timeline, and reaching the ultimate question, has Trump created the modern holy war? From there, we dive into our regional sections, starting with the UK, where we unpack the results of the recent elections, take a look at the UK's odd foreign posture, and discuss if Britain has become ungovernable. Then, in the EU section, we discuss how Russia's sphere of influence is fading, why Europe's energy transition isn't what you expect, as well as looking at the Euro's missing members. Finally, in the global section, we discuss if we're seeing echoes of the First World War, what's next for Iran, as well as what really came from the Gen Z protests we saw emerging last year. That's not even everything. With this 80-page issue, our joint longest ever, there's even more to read than I've even been able to mention here. So click the link in the description to learn more and grab your copy today.